We were still marching when it happened. Not forming line. Not deployed. Just a column of wet, tired men moving through trees and mud, heads down against the rain. The road had narrowed into a forest track, churned into thick clay by wagons and artillery. Rain fell steady and cold, soaking through coats, trickling down necks, turning the ground into something that sucked at our boots with every step. The woods pressed close on either side, tall pines and tangled undergrowth swallowing sound and sight alike. I remember thinking only of my feet. Lift. Step. Don't slip. Don't fall. Then the world cracked open. A single musket shot snapped from the trees ahead. Sharp. Close. Not a warning. Not a signal. A bullet hissed past my ear. Before I could even turn my head, the woods erupted. A full volley tore out of the rain-soaked timber, orange flashes blooming between tree trunks, smoke billowing low and fast in the wet air. Men shouted. Someone screamed. The column shuddered as bodies pressed inward, boots slipping, rifles knocking against shoulders. Down, get down. I dropped without thinking, mud splashing up my sleeves as another volley crashed overhead. Branches snapped. Leaves shredded. The rain seemed to vanish beneath the sound of gunfire. Rebs in the woods. Where? Form line, damn it, form line. Orders collided in the air, tangled and useless. There was no clear front. No open field. Just trees, smoke, rain, and noise. I crawled toward the side of the road, heart hammering so hard it drowned everything else. My hands shook as I brought my rifle up, ramming a cartridge home with fingers numb from cold and fear. Another volley hit. Too close. Dirt kicked up around us. A man to my left went down hard, his hat tumbling into the mud as he disappeared from sight. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Minnesota left face into the trees. Briggs' voice cut through the chaos, hoarse but steady. I turned, slipping, catching myself on a sapling as men scrambled to obey. We pushed into the woods in fragments, no clean line, no neat spacing. Just knots of men firing at muzzle flashes, at movement, at sound. Smoke clung low, trapped by the rain and branches, turning the forest into a gray maze. Visibility shrank to yards. Sometimes less. I fired once. Then again. I don't know if I hit anything. I don't know if there was even a man where I aimed. Somewhere behind me, artillery boomed, dull and distant through the trees. Fort Magruder. We didn't know it yet, but that thunder was already shaping the fight. Hold, don't push too far. Someone shouted it. Someone else shouted the opposite. Men surged forward anyway. Jensen stumbled past me, face pale beneath streaks of rain and mud. His eyes were wide. Too wide. Can't see them, he said, breath coming fast. Can't see anything. Stay with me, I shouted back, grabbing his sleeve as another volley cracked through the trees. Just stay low, fire when you see the flash. He nodded, but his hands trembled as he raised his rifle. I'd seen that look before. Not fear alone. Something closer to being overwhelmed. The rain fell harder. The smoke thickened. The noise became constant, directionless. At some point, we were no longer advancing. We were simply trying not to be driven back. A shell burst somewhere to our right, shaking the ground and sending a shower of wet leaves down on our heads. Men flinched. Someone yelled that cavalry was coming. Someone else yelled that it was a lie. None of us knew. I pressed my back against a tree, reloading by feel, breath ragged. The bark was slick beneath my fingers. Mud crept up my trousers. Rain dripped from my cap, brim into my eyes. Another flash. Another shot. A bullet struck the tree inches from my shoulder, burying itself with a dull thud. I froze for half a second too long. Then Briggs was there, shoving past, firing into the smoke. "Stand your ground," he roared. "They're probing, don't let them roll us." "Stand where? Against what?" The woods gave no answers. Only noise. Only pressure. Only the growing certainty that this was no skirmish. This was the battle, and it had found us before we even knew where we were. The first rush of firing didn't stop. It swelled. Volley after volley cracked from the woods ahead and to our flank, bouncing between the trees so that sound came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Men shouted in 3 different directions at the same time. Some dropped to their knees, others tried to run forward, and a few simply froze where they stood, caught between instinct and orders. The rain did not care. It kept falling in thin, cold sheets, pattering on leaves, dripping from hat brims and rifle barrels, mixing with the powder smoke until the very air felt like wet ash. "Dress the line, dress the line." An officer shouted it somewhere to our right, but there was no line to dress. We were scattered among trees and bushes, half in the road, half off it, trying to point our rifles at flashes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. I slid behind a broad oak, pressing my shoulder into the damp bark, and rammed another cartridge down the barrel. My hands were slick with rain and mud. The ramrod stuck halfway before I forced it home. I leveled the musket toward the last muzzle flash I'd seen and fired. The shot vanished into the storm of noise. I had no idea if it hit anything. That bothered me more than I expected. Jensen stumbled up against the same tree, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling so fast it looked painful. His cap was skewed, his hair plastered to his forehead, rain and sweat running together in channels down his cheeks. "I can't see them," he said. "I fire, but I'm firing at nothing. I don't know where they are." "Neither do they," I answered, though I wasn't sure it was true. "Stay low, aim where you see the flash or the smoke. That's all any of us can do." He nodded, but his eyes didn't steady. They kept darting from shadow to shadow, as if the whole forest might suddenly step forward and reveal itself as enemy. Somewhere behind us, a bugle tried to sound a call, but the rain and gunfire swallowed the notes halfway through. A cannon boomed again, closer this time, and the earth shook under our boots. Clods of wet soil thudded against tree trunks and splashed into the puddles at our feet. "Left there on the left." "No, up the road." "Hold your position." The shouts overlapped, collided, contradicted. There was no sense of a single voice guiding us. It felt like a dozen different battles happening inside the same patch of woods. A man bolted through the trees in front of us, his eyes wild. "They're flanking us, they're flanking." He tripped on a root before he could finish, sprawled into the mud, lost his rifle. Another soldier grabbed his shoulder and dragged him behind a stump. "Get hold of yourself, man," the second soldier snapped. Nobody said fall back. But his own voice shook. The smoke grew thicker as more men fired. It didn't rise cleanly into the sky. Instead, it mingled with the rain and hung low, coiling around trunks and bushes, creeping along the ground like a fog that burned the eyes. Shapes blurred into smudges. Color drained away until gray and brown were all that remained. Briggs emerged from the haze to our right, hat gone, hair soaked flat against his skull. His face was streaked with mud, but his eyes were clear and hard. "Hold here," he said. "You hear me. We hold along this rise, don't push any farther into the trees. We don't know how many they have." He clapped Jensen on the shoulder. "You breathe slower, son. Short breaths'll knock you out faster than any bullet." Jensen tried to nod again, but his throat worked soundlessly for a moment before he managed. "Yes, Corporal." Briggs moved on, shouting the same orders to the men strung out along our little patch of ground. "Hold here. Don't rush. Don't break." I reloaded again, movements more automatic now. "Bite poor ram half-cock cap raise." Another flash through the trees. I fired. This time I saw something fall. A shadow that had been upright suddenly folded inward and vanished behind a bush. I didn't feel satisfaction, only a sick, heavy understanding that somewhere a man's story had ended, and I had helped draw the line under it. Rain dripped from my sleeve. My fingers had gone numb. To our left the firing slowed, then briefly stopped. To our front it continued in irregular bursts. To our right it suddenly intensified. "They're shifting," Callahan shouted from a few trees over. "They're sliding down our flank." He moved closer, crouched low, splashing mud as he came. "Briggs says keep tight. No one goes alone. We move in pairs." "Jensen stays with me," I said. Callahan gave him a quick glance, saw the tremor in his hands, and nodded. "Good, don't let him drift." The ground underfoot was getting worse. What had been wet soil in the morning was now a mess of churned mud, broken branches, and dropped equipment. Men slipped when they tried to change position. More than once, someone fell hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs, lying stunned until a comrade grabbed his collar and hauled him back up. A shell crashed into the trees ahead and exploded with a brutal crack. Splinters flew through the air like arrows. One tore a strip from my sleeve. Another hummed past my ear. Then, for a few seconds, everything was a ringing in my head and flashes behind my eyes. When the world came back into focus, Jensen was still beside me, but he was no longer just pale. He looked hollow. "I can't do it," he whispered. "I don't know where to aim. I don't know where they are. What if I shoot one of ours? What if I—" I grabbed his coat with my free hand and pulled him back behind the tree. "Listen to me," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "You load. You stay behind this trunk. You fire only when you see a clear flash in front. If you don't see it, you don't shoot. That's all you need to do, just that." His breathing was ragged. For a moment I thought he might bolt. Then he swallowed hard, shut his eyes, reopened them, and nodded once. "All right," he said. "All right, I can do that." We worked that way for a time that felt like hours, though it might have been minutes. Rain. Load. Fire. Listen. Shift an inch. Repeat. The forest gave us only glimpses of the enemy. A hat. A sleeve. A flicker of movement behind a stump. But there was no denying they were there in numbers, moving, adjusting, testing our line. Once, between volleys, the wind shifted and carried a sound to us that made my skin prickle. A cheer. From somewhere beyond the trees. Not ours. I couldn't see what they were cheering. I didn't want to know. Briggs returned, half-bent, mud up to his knees. "Word from the rear," he shouted. "They've got works around a place called Fort Magruder. This is their rear guard line. We hold here until we're told to push. No one advances alone, you hear me?" "We hear," Callahan answered. Jensen's lips moved around the name, as if trying it on. "Fort Magruder, never even heard of it." "You will by tonight," Briggs said, "if you're still breathing by then." He meant it as grim humor, but the truth in it was too close for comfort. The rain slanted harder, turning the smoke into streaks and turning the ground into a brown river under our boots. My shoulders burned. My hands ached. My ears rang from too many blasts too close together, but the line, such as it was, held. We had not been driven back. Not yet. But we hadn't moved forward either. We were stuck in the trees, in the rain and smoke, waiting for somebody somewhere to decide what happened next. And in that waiting, I felt something new settle into my bones. Not just fear. Not just anger. The simple understanding that this battle would not be clean, or clear, or glorious. We were not here to win a splendid charge. We were here to avoid being swept away. The firing did not settle into a pattern. It twisted. Sometimes it came in hard volleys from our front. Sometimes it flickered from the right. Sometimes it vanished entirely for half a minute, leaving only the rain and our own breathing, and then returned from some new direction we hadn't expected. No one seemed to know where the main line was. Hold here. Fall back to the road. Push forward on the left. The shouts came from different throats at different times, overlapping and canceling each other out. We were supposed to be one regiment, one line, but the woods made us into pockets. Each cluster of men had a different impression of what was happening. A group to our right suddenly began to pull back, stumbling through the mud, faces white, one man clutching his arm where blood seeped through his sleeve. Someone yelled after them to stand. Someone else shouted for them to clear the line. They kept coming anyway, heads down, eyes fixed on the trees they were leaving behind. "Are we falling back?" Jensen asked, voice too tight. "No," I said, "not unless Briggs says so." I hoped that was true. Briggs appeared again moments later, as if summoned by the doubt itself. His coat was slick with rain, his beard darkened, his eyes red-rimmed but sharp. "Nobody falls back without orders from Captain," he shouted. "You see men running who aren't wounded, you grab 'em and turn 'em around. This line breaks and we all get rolled up." Callahan pointed toward the right. "What about them?" Briggs followed his hand. The men we'd seen retreating had halted at the road and formed a ragged clump, some firing half-heartedly into the trees, some just standing and staring. An officer rode up and began gesturing sharply, trying to shove them back into position. "They'll be sent forward again or replaced," Briggs said. "Not our concern is right here." Right here was a few yards of muddy slope, a handful of trees, and the little piece of sky we could see through the branches overhead. It felt very small compared to the noise of the battle. Another volley tore into the woods from ahead. A twig snapped off above my head and dropped into my collar. I flinched, then forced my shoulders down. "Up a pace," Briggs called. "We're too far back off the rise. They'll walk past our muzzles if we don't move." We advanced a few steps, boots sucking at the mud, shoulders brushing trunks. It was not a grand charge. It was 3, maybe 4 yards, but even that felt like stepping into a heavier kind of air. I glanced to my left and caught a glimpse of another regiment through a gap in the trees, their line bent and broken by the undergrowth, flags half hidden, officers waving swords none of us could see clearly. They were advancing too, or trying to. Men dropped here and there in the smoke, but the movement continued. Then the gap closed and they vanished again. "Which way is Fort Magruder?" Jensen asked. "Forward," Callahan said. "Everything is forward," Jensen muttered. "Might as well say somewhere in Virginia." A courier splashed up from the rear, horse lathered and steaming in the cold rain. He pulled up short near Briggs, handed him a folded note, then wheeled and vanished back the way he'd come. Briggs read the note, wiped water from it with his thumb, and read it again, jaw working. "What is it?" I asked. "Advance as able on present front," he said slowly. "Support neighboring units. Maintain pressure. That's all it says." "Advance where?" Mills called from a few trees away. "We can't even see 30 yards." Briggs crumpled the note in his fist. "We move half a company up. The rest hold. We don't go blind into anything we can't get out of." He pointed. You and you forward with me. Minnesota, stay with Jensen and hold this tree line. If we're driven back, you buy us time to reform." "Understood," I said, though my throat felt dry as dust. Watching Briggs lead that small group forward was like watching men step into fog. One moment they were shapes among the trees. The next, the rain and smoke swallowed them. Jensen's breathing sped up again. "We shouldn't be split. We shouldn't be split like this." "It's only a short push," I told him. "They'll be back or we'll follow." "Or we won't," he said softly. A fresh ripple of musket fire sounded ahead. Then a scream. Then more shots, closer, sharper. I raised my rifle, trying to find where to point it. I saw only gray shapes moving behind darker shapes. Branches. Men. Smoke. All blurred together. "Wait for them to come to us," I said. "We're the anchor now, that's what Briggs meant. We hold while they move." He nodded again, but his hand on the rifle was slick and unsteady. Minutes stretched, they felt like hours. Rain continued its steady work of soaking everything. Our cartridge boxes grew heavier with water. Our hands numbed. Our shoulders throbbed from the constant half-raise, half-lower of the musket. Then suddenly, figures appeared ahead. For one awful moment, I nearly fired. Blue coats. Not gray. "Hold your fire," I shouted chest tight. "Ours." It was part of Briggs' party, falling back in haste but not en route. He reappeared in the lead, face set, eyes blazing. "Back a few yards," he called. "They've got more men on that rise than we thought. We hold here. This is the line, this is it." We stepped back as they came in, making room, closing gaps, reforming as best the trees allowed. "What did you see?" Callahan asked. "Ahead," Briggs said. "Enough rifles pointing the wrong way, and works behind them. Nothing fancy, but enough. They're not just skirmishers. This is their rear guard, and they mean to make us pay for every step." Artillery thundered somewhere off to the left. A moment later another shell screamed overhead, then burst far behind us. The ground jumped under the blast. "Is that ours or theirs?" Jensen asked. "Does it matter?" Mills muttered. It did and it didn't. To a man in the trees, noise was noise and death was death. We shifted again, not forward now, but sideways, extending the line where someone shouted that there was a gap. The command passed man to man, often changed in the passing. "Refuse the right." "No, extend the right." "Close in on the center." More than once we began to move one way, only to be shouted the other. At one point we found ourselves nearly shoulder to shoulder with men from another regiment, their faces just as tired, just as confused. An officer I didn't know yelled an instruction that contradicted Harding's last order. For a few seconds, both sets of men wavered. "Which command do we follow?" Mills whispered. "Ours," I said, "always ours." So we held where Harding had told us to hold, even as the other regiment drifted away into the smoke, their flags barely visible. The battle felt less like a line now and more like a tangle. Companies, half-companies, small knots of men, each hearing only a fraction of what was shouted, each seeing only a sliver of the field. No one I knew could have drawn a map of what was happening. The battle was not on paper. It was in the mud at our feet, in the tree 10 yards ahead, in the space between one volley and the next. Somewhere up there, beyond the woods, Fort Magruder sat on its rise with its own guns and trenches, anchoring the Confederate defense. We couldn't see it yet, but we felt its presence in every order to "advance as able" and every correction to "hold your ground." We were caught between those two phrases. Advance as able. Hold your ground. Two ideas pulling at the same set of legs. By the time the bugle finally sounded us to shift toward the open ground, my ears rang, my shoulders burned, and my faith in any clear plan had thinned. But the sound of that bugle meant one thing. We were leaving the shelter of the woods. We were going to see the fight in front of Fort Magruder with our own eyes. And the enemy would see us just as clearly. The woods did not end all at once. They thinned. Trees grew farther apart. Underbrush gave way to low tangles of scrub. The ground opened just enough that we could see more than a few yards ahead, and for the first time, the rain did not feel like a curtain drawn right in front of our faces. Then through the gaps I saw it. Not clearly at first. Just darker lines where the land rose and flattened, where something more regular than trees cut across the natural curves of the earth. "Is that it?" Jensen asked quietly. "Is that the fort?" Callahan squinted through the drifting smoke. "Hard to say. Could be a ridge, could be works." "It's both," Briggs said. "Fort Magruder sits on a rise." The bugle call rang again, dull through the rain, and an officer we barely recognized rode up along our scattered line. His horse was splattered from hoof to shoulder. "Company forward out of the woods. Form line on the left of that regiment there. Move." He pointed toward a group of blue-coated men already emerging from the trees ahead, trying to straighten themselves into something like a proper formation as musket flashes burst in front of them. Harding appeared on foot, sword in hand, and reinforced the order. You heard him. Forward, stay together. Once we clear the trees, keep your intervals and dress on the colors. No one runs. No one rushes ahead alone. Forward it was then. We stepped out from the last fringe of trees into the edge of an open field. It was not open the way the fields at home were open. This one was scarred. Shallow trenches, hasty works, fallen rails, patches of churned earth where shells had landed earlier. Beyond it, on the higher ground, sat Fort Magruder. Now that we could see it, I understood why they'd chosen to stand here. It wasn't a stone fortress, not like the old stories. It was earth and timber, sloped and layered, with guns peering out from cut openings, their black mouths pointed down toward us. Trenches and rifle pits ran out on either side like arms, linking smaller works into a jagged line. It didn't look grand. It looked practical, stubborn, hard to uproot. God help whoever has to go straight at that, Callahan said. Who do you think that is? Mills muttered. The answer came quickly. Forward Minnesota, on the line. We moved into position beside another regiment, our flags rippling wet and heavy in the rain. Men tried to straighten their files, boots sliding in the mud, shoulders bumping. No one looked polished. No one looked ready. But there we were, facing the fort. Artillery flashed along the Confederate works. Shells shrieked overhead, some aimed at our batteries somewhere behind, some at the advancing infantry. One exploded not far in front of our line, sending a fountain of mud and smoke into the air. When it settled, 2 men from the neighboring regiment were on the ground, others bending over them. We didn't have long to watch. Advance at the quick. There was no grand speech, no dramatic pause, just the order, plain and hard. We stepped forward. The mud clung to our boots and tried to hold us back. Each pace felt heavier than the last. Muskets weighed more than they had an hour before. Packs dug into shoulders already sore from days of marching and work. We walked toward Fort Magruder because there was nothing else to do. The rain blurred the edges of the works, turned the Confederate line into a smudge atop the rise. We could see movement but not faces, dark shapes loading, aiming, shifting, waiting. Halfway across the open ground, they fired. The sound came down the slope like a tearing sheet. A long, ripping crack of muskets firing in near unison. Flashes bloomed all along the parapet. Smoke rolled out and down. Men in our front rank jerked and fell. One pitched forward into the mud without a sound. Another spun sideways, dropping his rifle as though surprised by his own legs giving out. Our rifles answered, though I could not say who gave the order first. The line halted just long enough to fire, then lurched forward again, the rhythm of advance broken into ragged steps. "Keep moving," Harding shouted. "Keep the line together, don't bunch up." It sounded good in theory. In practice, we were dodging holes and bodies and half-fallen fence rails, trying not to trip while also trying not to stare at what the last volley had done to the men in front. I fired when everyone else fired. Loaded when everyone else loaded. My hands worked on memory alone. The fort loomed larger with every step. They fired again. Another ripping volley. The sound of balls striking mud and wood and flesh blended into something ugly and dull. To our right, a regiment wavered, its line bending inward like a weakened plank. A few men turned back half a step. Officers surged toward them, shoving them forward, shouting themselves hoarse. The colors dipped, then rose again. "They're not breaking," Briggs said under his breath. "Not yet." Neither were the Confederates. Shells from our own batteries screamed overhead and crashed into the works. Earth exploded upward, splashing over the guns, over the men, over the parapets. For a heartbeat, the fort disappeared behind a wall of dirt. Then the smoke cleared, and it was still there. Jensen stumbled beside me, almost losing his footing as his boot slid in a slick patch. I grabbed his arm and hauled him upright. His face had gone from pale to gray. I can't catch my breath," he said. "Feels like the air's been squeezed out of my chest." Breathe shallow, I told him. One breath at a time, eyes on me, not on the fort. It worked for a few steps, then he looked up anyway. The works were close enough now that we could see the men behind them more clearly. Gray coats, slouch hats, some bareheaded, faces lined with strain, shouting as they rammed charges, steadied muskets, and aimed down at us. We were walking into a wall that talked back. Down, someone yelled. We dropped as another volley came. The balls hissed low overhead, some striking with solid, meaty sounds I didn't want to think about. When we rose again, the line was thinner. Advance as able. Hold your ground. The two ideas were still pulling at us. Somewhere along the line, a bugle sounded another order, but I couldn't make out the tune. The rain and gunfire shredded it. All I knew was that we were still moving, and Fort Magruder still stood. We stopped again to fire, this time closer, our shots slamming into the parapet with enough force to send up small spurts of dirt and splinters. A man in gray dropped from the works, arms flailing as he slid down the inner slope. Another took his place almost immediately. The fort didn't hesitate. It spat fire and smoke down at us as though our advance were little more than a change in the weather. Beside me, Callahan swore under his breath. "This isn't a fight," he said. "It's a grind." And that was what it felt like. Not a charge. Not a clash of bright steel. A slow, deliberate grind of two armies pushing against each other through rain and mud and fear, anchored on the stubborn earth of Fort Magruder. We were far from winning. We were not quite losing. We were caught in the middle, with nowhere to go but forward or down. There came a point when I stopped hearing individual volleys. The sound became one long tearing roar in my ears. We were close enough now that every shot from the fort felt personal. The air in front of us shimmered with rain and smoke and invisible death. Men fired, reloaded, fired again, hands moving on habit alone, faces set in that strange expression soldiers wear when they know too much and can still do nothing but obey. "Keep the line, hold here." Harding's voice reached us in fragments. He was somewhere down the line, sword raised, hat gone, his hair plastered to his head. I could see him when the smoke drifted just right, waving the men forward a few yards, then shouting for them to hold, to steady, to fire by rank. It was like trying to direct a storm. We were knee-deep in mud in some places now. Each step forward sank, pulled, resisted. A fallen man didn't just fall, he vanished halfway into the earth. More than once I saw a soldier grab for his comrade and nearly lose his own footing in the struggle. Jensen slipped again. His boot skidded on a patch of churned clay and he lurched sideways into me, almost dragging us both down. I caught him under the arm and hauled him upright. His weight felt wrong, looser somehow, as if he were no longer fully holding himself. "Stay on your feet," I said. "You go down in this, you might not come up." He nodded, but there was no color left in his face. His lips had taken on a faint bluish tinge. Rain ran down his cheeks like sweat. His eyes stared past me, fixed on the fort. "I can't feel my fingers," he said. "You don't need to feel them, you just need them to move. Load, aim, fire, that's all." He tried to smile at that, but his mouth only twitched. Another volley crashed from the works. I heard the balls strike something solid behind us. A fence post, a tree, maybe a man. I didn't turn to see which. The line shifted, men stepping around new absences, closing gaps that hadn't been there a moment before. To our right, someone screamed. A ragged sound, cut off half-finished. A group of men began to fall back a few yards on instinct, then hesitated when an officer grabbed the colors and shoved them forward. Hold where you are." The flag dipped, then straightened. The men stopped retreating. It was breaking point and repair, over and over again. I glanced at Briggs. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. His shoulders slumped between shots, only to straighten again when he raised his rifle. He was shouting less now, saving his breath. His eyes moved constantly, checking the men, the gaps, the works ahead. "This is where they try to crack us," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "How do you know?" Callahan asked. "Because if I were them, that's what I would do." The Confederates fired again, this time in a rougher volley, but there were more flashes than before. Reinforcements had come up behind the fort. We could see fresh shapes on the parapet, fresh rifles pointing down. "They're thickening their line," Mills said. "They're not going anywhere." "No," Briggs said. "They mean to hold long enough to bleed us, then slip away when we're too tired to chase." Another shell from our batteries slammed into the slope just below the fort. Earth leapt skyward in a dirty fountain, showering both their works and the space in front. A few men on the parapet fell back. Others ducked and rose again, spitting fire. We fired again. And again. At some point, my shoulder started to ache from the recoil. The stock left a dull bruise against my coat that I could feel even through all the noise and numbness. My hands worked slower. My breathing came heavier. Jensen's breathing came in ragged bursts. I think I'm going to be sick," he said. "Then turn your head and be sick," I answered, "but don't drop your rifle." He turned briefly, retched into the mud, then wiped his mouth on his sleeve. His hands shook so violently afterward that he nearly spilled his next cartridge. "Here," I said, "I'll help." I steadied his rifle while he loaded, keeping the barrel angled safely away from us. It was awkward, clumsy work, and we lost time doing it, but it kept him in the line. "Why won't they break?" he asked. "We're so close, why won't they just break and run?" "Because they know what happens if they do," I said. "Because the men behind us are just as many as the ones behind them. Because that's not how this kind of fight works." It wasn't a satisfying answer. I didn't have one of those to give. To our left, a surge of shouting rose louder this time, edged with something sharper than fear. I risked a glance and saw another part of the Union line pushing closer to the works, almost at the ditch. They tried to rush it, stumbling over the last stretch of ground. Some made it to the edge. Some did not. The fort answered with a vicious volley point-blank into their faces. The men who had reached the front fell back in chaos, stumbling, dragging wounded, losing hats and muskets in the struggle. The little advance collapsed into a muddled retreat to their original position. "See," Briggs said quietly. "They tried to break them, the fort held. Now we keep trading shots." "How long can this go on?" Mills asked. "As long as the generals want it to," Briggs said, "or until the ground is too full of bodies to move." Jensen flinched at that. His eyes had taken on a distant look, the look of someone whose mind is trying to step away from the place where his body stands. I reached out and gripped his shoulder, hard enough for him to feel it through his coat. "Stay here with us," I said. "Don't go wandering inside your head. You do that, you're as good as gone." He looked at me, really looked, for the first time since we left the trees. His lower lip trembled, not from cold. "I'm not brave," he whispered. "I thought, after everything we've seen after Sam, I thought I'd be more ready, but I'm not. I'm shaking apart." "Everyone's shaking apart," I said. "Some of us are just better at hiding it." "I don't think I can hide it," he said. "Then don't," I answered. "Just don't run." It was the only thing I could promise him. Not glory, not courage. Just that one command. "Don't run." Another volley came from the works. I felt the air move around us, felt the line contract again as men fell, heard the thumps and curses, the quick gasps that might be prayers or surprise. Someone behind us tried to bolt. He turned and started back toward the trees, slipping, splashing. Harding caught him by the collar. "Get back in line, soldier," he snarled. "I can't, sir, I call." "You can," Harding said. "You are. If you move again, I'll see you shot myself." The man froze, then sagged, then turned back to the line, hands shaking so violently he could barely raise his rifle. Jensen watched all of that. I could see the struggle in his face. "Don't run," he breathed, repeating my words to himself. "Don't run, don't run." He loaded again. Slow, clumsy, but he loaded. He fired. The shot was wild, but it was aimed at the fort, not the sky. We were at the breaking point, all of us. The fort still stood. The rain still fell. The mud still sucked at our feet. But the line had not broken. Not here. Not yet. We weren't winning. We weren't losing. We were enduring. Sometimes, in that kind of fight, endurance is the only victory you can claim. At some point, the firing began to thin out. Not all at once. Not with any clear signal. Just a few longer gaps between volleys. A few less flashes on the parapet. A little more of the fort visible between waves of smoke. The rain eased to a steady drizzle. The sky remained low and gray, but the worst of the sheets had passed, leaving us soaked through and shivering, steam rising from wool and skin. My hands felt heavy. Every time I tried to move my fingers, it was as though someone had wrapped them in wet cloth. I reloaded slower. Everyone did. Across the line, men coughed, spat mud, wiped their faces with sleeves that were already filthy. Some stared straight ahead, as if the fort held them in place by sheer force of will. Others glanced down the ranks, counting who was still there and who was not. "Cease fire on the right," someone shouted. Then, a moment later, from another throat, "Hold your fire until ordered." The confusion lingered even as the battle began to quiet. No one wanted to be the first fool to lower his guard. Briggs raised his hand. "Wait," he called. "Wait for the word. Do not fire unless they do." I held my musket ready, barrel trained toward the works. I saw men in gray still moving along the parapet. Some were carrying litters. Some were stooped over, helping others to their feet. They looked smaller now, less like a wall and more like men. Just men. As worn and soaked and scared as we were. Jensen was still beside me. His breathing had steadied some, but he looked as if the fight had scraped him raw from the inside. His face was a mottled mix of rain, sweat, and dirt. His hands no longer trembled violently, but they shook enough that he had to adjust his grip on the rifle every few moments. "Is it over?" he asked. "No," I said, "just less." That seemed the truest way to describe it. The battle was not gone. It was only farther away than it had been an hour ago. A murmur ran along the line. Word passed in bits and pieces. The left pushed them back. Cavalry hit them somewhere up the road. "They're pulling some guns off that ridge." "No, they're just shifting them." I did not know what was true. None of us did. What I knew was that the men in front of us were no longer firing with the same fury. And we were no longer being driven into the mud with each volley. Harding walked the line, boots sinking deep in the wet earth. His sword hung at his side, point muddy. He did not shout now. He spoke in a voice just loud enough for each cluster to hear. "Hold your positions. Do not advance without orders. If they attack, you stand. If they stay, you stand. You've held all day. You can hold a little longer." It sounded simple when he said it like that. It did not feel simple. My shoulder throbbed with a deep ache from the constant recoil. My back hurt from hunching forward. My legs felt as though someone had filled them with sand. When I turned my head, my neck cracked. But we were still there. All along the field, in broken lines and bent formations, the blue coats held. The light began to fade. The rain became a mist, then a fine, drifting spray. The fort on the rise blurred at the edges as the day sank toward evening. Lanterns flickered into life in the rear. Somewhere behind us, a band tried to play, then stopped after a few bars when it became clear no one wanted music. We stacked our dead and wounded as gently as we could behind the line. Stretcher bearers moved back and forth, faces drawn and serious. I caught glimpses. Boot soles. Mud-covered blankets. A pale hand hanging loose for a moment before someone tucked it back under. I did not look long. If I had, My legs might have refused to move at all. "Reckon this is what winning looks like," Callahan said quietly. "Did we win?" Mills asked. "We didn't break," Callahan answered. "They didn't push us off, that's something." Briggs shook his head slowly. "This wasn't about winning. Not for them, not for us. They were buying time, we were buying ground. Both sides paid." He looked up toward the fort. "They'll fall back again," he said. "Tonight or tomorrow. They can't stay here with the whole army pressing. But they'll say when they tell it that they bloodied us for every yard." He was probably right. The word Williamsburg passed along the line more often now. Officers talked about roads, about crossroads, about the next position the enemy would likely take up. We heard just enough to know that this day was not the end of anything. It was a step. Jensen rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. "I thought a battle would feel like something else," he said, louder in my head, clearer. "How does it feel?" I asked. "Like confusion," he said. "Like I know we stood here and fired and loaded and didn't run, but I cannot tell you what we actually did, only that we're still alive." "That might be enough," I said. He looked at me for a moment. "Is it?" I did not answer. I did not know. As the last of the daylight bled out of the sky, the firing dwindled to scattered shots. Single rifles cracking in the distance. A final artillery round from somewhere unseen. Then quiet. Not complete. There was still the rustle of movement, the groans from the rear, the hiss of rain on canvas, but quiet enough that my ears noticed the absence. Harding returned, his coat dark with water and mud. "Hold here for the night," he told us. "No advance, no retreat, pickets out. Keep low fires if you must, but no bright flame on the front. The enemy is still out there." "Did we drive them off?" Mills asked. Harding hesitated. "They've pulled some forces back," he said, "but they're not gone, not yet. Command says we hold the ground we've taken. That's our task for tonight." He moved on before we could ask more. We settled into it as best we could. No tents, not this close to the works. Just blankets, if we had them dry enough to matter, and our own bodies for warmth. We ate what we had, which was not much. Hard bread gone damp in the rain. Meat that tasted of smoke and salt more than anything else. Some men had coffee. Most had only water and weariness. I sat with my back against a half-rotted fence post, rifle across my knees, watching the dim outline of the fort fade into the darkness. Lanterns moved within it like fireflies trapped inside a hill. Jensen sat beside me, knees drawn up, arms loosely draped over them. "I didn't run," he said quietly. "No," I answered, "you didn't." I was afraid almost the whole time. So was I. He looked at me surprised. "You didn't look it. Doesn't mean it wasn't there." He nodded and let his head rest back against the post. We were soaked, chilled, exhausted. The mud had found its way into our boots, our cuffs, our sleeves. My hands were stained dark with powder and earth. I could still taste smoke at the back of my throat. Yet in that miserable quiet, a small truth settled over me. We had been thrown into confusion. We had been pushed, bent, nearly broken. The battle had been a tangle of orders and terror and noise. But we had held. On that stretch of ground in front of that fort, as the day turned to night, we were still there. Whether history would call it a victory, I did not know. History would speak of generals and movements and positions. What I would remember was the rain, the mud, the noise, and the simple fact that when the darkness finally closed, my boots still stood in the same Virginia field where they had that morning. We had held. Sometimes that is all a soldier can claim.